Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Reformed Church Center webinar asking the question, is the RCA Planting International Churches, and what does that mean? We have with us today Luis Ruiz. He's an ordained minister and the RCA Global Mission Supervisor in North America, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Additionally, he serves as the International Missions Executive for the Clases de las Naciones. Luis is a graduate of Western Seminary and Fuller Seminary, and we at New Brunswick will not hold that against him. I think if you add the ages of Western and Fuller together, you get the age of New Brunswick, so it might be okay. He has an MA in Intercultural and Global Leadership from Fuller. Dale Ossink, who will be presenting second, is an RCA Minister of Word and Sacrament, has been for 40 years, committed to family and cultivating healthy leaders in churches. He pastored local RCA churches for 19 years, and for the last 22 has worked for the Regional Synod of the Heartland as a coach, consultant, and visionary leader with a focus on church multiplication. And Chad Farrand is an RCA pastor who serves as the Director of Church Multiplication for the RCA. He's also a D-Min candidate in Missiology and Global Christianity at a really cool school, and lives in Orlando with his lovely wife, and we are glad to have all of them with us. Asking some of the probing questions and then responding to their presentations will be Alita Shepler, who served as an RCA missionary in Venezuela from 1989 to 1999 and continues to be a commissioned missionary. Currently serves on the Church Multiplication Committee and coordinates church multiplication for the Synod of the Mid-Atlantics. And Liz Estes is an RCA minister. She's pastor at Reddington Reformed Church in Hunterdon County, New Jersey. She has an MA in philosophy from Catholic University and an MDiv from Union Seminary, and is a D-Min candidate in prophetic urban ministry at New Brunswick. She also moderates the RCA's Commission on Theology, and we are glad to have all of them with us. Now, what's going to happen is that first Luis, then Dale, and then Chad are going to talk about exactly what is this whole thing about international church planting. What is it that's being done? And after each of them, Alita and Liz are going to ask a couple of clarifying questions. And then when the three of them are done, Alita and Liz are going to give some responses, and then we will open up the floor and they can respond to each other, or you all can ask questions. So without any further ado, Luis.
Thank you, James. Appreciate the introduction and just being together with this wonderful panel and with all of you listening and watching online. What about this notion of international church planting? I know it's brought a lot of conversation and questions even to our desk at Global Mission, and I'm just excited to be able to share some of the experiences that we've been seeing as part of the agency and ministry as we've worked around the world, as you know, for 300 plus years in the ministry of mission with the Reformed Church in America. I like to say that we are partnering with majority world leaders all across the globe. And that's even more a focus when we think about the majority world now living in our own backyard. So much has changed over the years when we've sent missionaries all over the world to serve in different countries and cultures and contexts. And that was something that we did with much pride and with much humility as well, knowing that this is what God had called this small denomination to do around the world. We find ourselves today in a new world, in a new 21st century mission world. One of the things that we like to do as a Global Mission staff is to read about our history, is to stay informed about how we made decisions and saw the world in different times and generations. I'll put a plug in for the book called Called to Serve, Essays of RCA Global Mission. One of the books that really detail a summary of our mission history. And what I noticed in those summaries is that throughout each endeavor of missional initiative, Global Mission said no to many of these new initiatives. When approached by Samuel Zwemer to participate and establish a medical mission in the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, Global Mission said no. It was interesting seeing this history over and over again, that these wonderful entrepreneurs and ministers went and did it anyway, and were blessed and saw God's hand move. And we today claim those ministries as part of RCA Global Mission. I say that only to just point out that I think when we're looking at the 21st century mission in this connection towards partnering with majority world leaders, Global Mission is saying yes to this idea. Global Mission is saying yes to the initiative of partnering with church planters all across the world. We find ourselves in a new season in which the center of the Christian church is now in the global South. Many booms of evangelicalism has been found throughout this part of the world. It's a season in which mission is now from everywhere to everyone, where we have Brazil, Korea, many countries now leading the charge of mission across the globe. This is an exciting time, and it's exciting to partner with these majority world leaders in their initiatives to develop new mission fields and new mission posts across this world, but particularly seeing them in our own backyard here in North America. And this is where the story of the Florida Clases de las Naciones comes in. This has been something that I have participated in and have engaged with wonderful relationships of church planters, planters from other countries in the global South, now gathered in Florida, and we know they're gathered in Texas, in California, and many of our southern countries and immigrant communities across North America. And it's in these relationships that we're seeing God move and grow the global church. It's these relationships that have drawn them to us, the RCA, and we've built relationships with them, and they've become part of our classes. It's been a wonderful experience to see a diverse breadth and wisdom come into our classes. And that's the exciting part, is that it's in these relationships that we find that these pastors, these church planters, have networks in their own countries. And those networks are interested in being part of the Reformed Church in America. And it's in these connections that we're finding that RCA wants to do something new. Classes want to do something new. And these initiatives are being presented to us. And we're saying, yes, let's do it. Let's come together and work out these ideas and work out these wonderful relationships and partnerships across the globe. And so what do they look like? Well, Global Mission always prides ourselves in our vision to be a mission that exists to strengthen and grow the global church. And we're finding that to be a reality with our partners. And how are we doing that? I think sometimes the word international church planting sometimes rises the notions of past colonialism, of imperialism, and many of the things that we've experienced in our mission history that was negative around planting churches. But I'd like to present to us today, as part of our conversation, the notion of using maybe a different term, starting and adopting Reformed churches across continents. This is what we believe our mission is at this time. Partner with majority world leaders, church planters, pastors in our own backyard that are returning back to their home networks. And we are starting and adopting these new churches and these new relationships. And this is expanding across continents. And this is a wonderful time in our history. We're excited about participating in that. Thank you.
Liz, Alita, go ahead.
I have a really simple question. I've just never heard the term majority world leaders.
Yeah, that's a term being used by the missiological world, in which the term that would typically be used would be minority world or global south. So different words, different terms have been used in the past. The majority world just it allows the dignity of the rest of the world and the focus not to just be on the Western world. And so the majority world gives us a better picture of everyone else outside of the Western world, and particularly in the season in which the center of the church is now in the majority world areas. And so that world is that phrase or term is now being used in many of our missiological literature and education.
So just to clarify a little bit, is it reflective of the majority of Christianity or majority of people in the world?
It'll be people of the world. Yes, but also obviously Christianity being who we're focused on, it would be both.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, very interested in the history of RCA global missions. One of the things that has been confusing for a lot of people in the Regional Synod of Mid-Atlantics is, didn't we used to plant churches with our global partners? The Presbyterian Church of Mexico, the Presbyterian Church of Taiwan, didn't we plant with them so that it was in their nation that the church was being established and sustained and reproducing?
Yes, absolutely. We've always been in the business of church planting and partnering with our local leaders across the world. That continues and will continue. I think one of the, and you'll hear more from the other panelists, is that what we're making clear is that Global Mission will continue to partner with our partners around the world. We'll continue to develop these relationships that are part of our history. As one of our main values is that we believe in long-term mutual mission, in which we're in partnership for many, many years. And that looks like Chiapas, right? Nearly 100 years of partnership in which we've seen the Chiapas Presbyterian Church, the National Presbyterian Church of Mexico, grow to over 1 million believers just in the state of Chiapas. And that was started by RCA missionaries who became part of the context, part of the culture, and help grow local leadership. That will still continue, and that will not change. And that's a very, very important question you asked. And the response is, what we're identifying is that there are networks of leaders and churches who are part of our own RCA DNA, with pastors who have joined our classes that are saying, those networks also desire to be part of the Reformed Church in America, which is very different. That's a different concept, because it's about joining what the RCA is doing, particularly around polity, around our history, around our theology. And there's a growing desire within the majority world and these networks that desire to really interlock with what we're doing within our classes, and particularly within Reformed ministry, Reformed polity. And so that's the exciting part in the nuance that's different. You typically don't get that with our traditional partnerships when we're establishing their own churches, their own identity, their own context, and we just come alongside them and help them do that. So we will be always doing church planting, and we'll do them both side by side.
I just have one other follow-up question, and that is, I'm looking at the November 2 update that was on the RCA website, RCA International Church Planting Update. It says very specifically, international church planting is not a project of RCA Global Mission nor church multiplication. So that's a really interesting tension. It's happening, but it's not part of the mission. It's not in the kind of DNA. So it's all this is an interesting remark. That kind of jumped out at me.
Yeah, I think we could probably share a little bit more about that. My response is that this is a call that we are receiving at the local classes level, particularly in the Clases de las Naciones, with the majority being immigrant churches, particularly Hispanic, Spanish-speaking. It's those networks that I refer to that are developing those relationships within the classes, and the classes has reached out to Global Mission to say, how can we do this? Is this something we can do? And so we're partnering and coming alongside the classes as it's a local classes church initiative that we're coming alongside and seeing the shift of 21st century mission just happening before our eyes. And like I said in my opening remarks, we're saying yes rather than saying no. And so we're figuring that out, and we're on that journey of working together to see where God is leading us.
Thanks.
Luis, do you have the document that Dr. Van Engen produced for the Orlando gathering?
Yes.
I think that part of what we're struggling with at the Regional Synod of Mid-Atlantics anyway is I was invited to go to that gathering and COVID struck. And so at the end of the gathering, I had to do some correspondence with people and discovered from Dr. Van Engen that he had presented 20 questions. And the questions were great. I hope we answer a lot of those questions today. But at the very end of that document, he had a summary, and he basically said, here's an option for us. Do you have that available that you could read to us this morning?
Yeah, I don't have that available to read this morning. I would have to search for that. But I think that's something we could probably provide. And
I have it.
Oh, you have it.
I have
Oh, wonderful.
it. I
wonderful.
do have it. So he basically shared his final observation. We were looking at a first draft, which was an option for how to go forward with multiplication and church and global missions together. And he said, there's another option in all this. Each Clases de las Naciones and Central Plains for now would freely receive leaders, pastors, churches, and networks of churches to become members of their classes. The entire movement would be only within a classes, and each classes would receive whom they deem wise to do so, including on an international basis. Each classes then would work out who of their members would go to General Synod, and this would be a simple classes-based movement of international church multiplication, simple, short-term, and quick. There'd be no organizational superstructure to maintain, related finances would be the responsibility of each classes, and global mission and church multiplication would have no official organizational relationship to what each classes would be doing. And then this is the important part for me because of the history that I'm so interested in. Essentially, this is what Classis Amsterdam did for the new Reformed churches in the New World during the early colonial era. And I think that's where we are today. We never voted on this. I don't think when I reached out to Randy Weiner to say, hey, what happened? He said nothing. There was no outcome from the Orlando gathering. And I was like, oh, I have nothing to report to the regional synod then. But I think you all are doing this already. So I could be wrong. Tell me if I'm wrong, please.
Um, I don't know if you're wrong. I think it's more. I think it's what you've shared. I think was a pathway that was discerned by Classis representatives that were at that meeting, and I think that really helped clear and clarify. I think a position with a well-respected missiologist, and I think it did give an oath for the Classes de las Naciones, because I also serve with them as well. It gave us a confidence to walk in this direction by receiving and accepting leaders from other countries. And so we're in the process of that. My colleagues will share probably more about those experiences, but that is the reality. That is our journey. We're figuring this out, and like I said, I think the key point, probably the place in which I would maybe add or maybe change a little bit with the addition of global mission and church multiplication engaging, or maybe not engaging or not being responsible. I think there is a call to walk alongside through the experience and through the expertise that both agencies bring to the table, to walk alongside our classes in this decision and in their process of doing this. We want to do mission well. That's one of my virtues. Is things can be done, and even difficult projects and programs can be done. We just want to do good mission. We want to practice good values and good principles, and we have the history and the tradition to do that.
And since we seem to be moving a little away from clarifying and into responding, I'm going to let Dale go ahead, and Alita, you're going to get a chance to do some good responding later. So, Dale?
Greetings, everyone. It's an honor for me to be sharing, and James, thank you for asking me to be part of this panel, because you all are much more intelligent than I. I am a very humble, hopefully faithful and obedient servant, and I come sharing our story from Central Plains Classis, and even in the midst of my journey as an RCA pastor, what's interesting is my grandparents came over from the Netherlands, and my grandmother was one of the founding members, or close to a founding member, of my home church in Cleveland, Ohio, back in the 1890s. And yet my home church, when I was in the elementary grades, went through the whole transition with the traditional white flight from inner city Cleveland, what was once a Dutch thriving 750 seat filled sanctuary on Sundays, to when I was a second grader, there were maybe 15 of us in that sanctuary. And in the mid 60s, the decision of the consistory, my dad being an elder, was to say our mission is here. And the whole direction of the church changed to ministering to those in the community. So we became a multiracial, multicultural ministry. And that was really embryonic for me in understanding God's call for my life and ministry. And now, after 40 years. Actually, in one way, shape, or form, I've been on an RCA church staff for 46 years. I'm experiencing that same refreshing, multiracial, multicultural sweeping of God in my life and in our classes. So let me share this. On behalf of the Synod of the Heartland, for the last 5 years, I have been working only with the classes of Central Plains, which is Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. And in 2017, we got serious about asking, are we being faithful? Are we obedient? And we recognized that we really were not being the people God wanted us to be. You know, out of John 15, we recognize that God asks for much fruit. Well, we looked at ourselves. We were 13 churches total. 11 were declining rapidly, and 2 barely were plateaued over the last 10 years. We had attempted 2 church plants in the previous 20 years. Both were closed. And so we recognized quickly we were not being the people God wanted us to be. So we got on our knees and we confessed that. And at the same time, we began praying to discern, okay, God, what do you want to do? Who do you want us to be? How do you want to work through us? And out of that discernment, we assembled a multiplication team because we discerned that God wanted us to multiply. And so in human terms, we attempted to write out what we discerned. And I suppose it could be a gimmick, but what we sensed was God wanting us to be 25 ministries by 2025 and 5,000 disciples by 2025. But that was a human way to try to capture what God was calling us to do in multiplying and much fruit. So that was in January of 18, we began, shared that vision with our churches, and we just lived into it. Many were skeptical, many were fearful, and yet we started 13 churches we began with 13 churches in 2018. And so today of December 2022, we are 43 ministries. So we have gained 30 ministries in the last 4 to 5 years. And I guarantee that it is not something we have humanly put together. I believe, and I don't want to make this too spiritual, but at the same time, this is a God movement for us. We didn't orchestrate this. We did not humanly create this. We heard what we sensed was God's vision for us, and we went all in on that, not knowing. And so the scriptural kind of context for those of us on that multiplication team would go all the way back to the Jesus' first miracle at Cana. Because in that experience, they needed wine. And the mother of Jesus said, hey, do what he says. And Jesus told the servants, put water in the jars. So the servants went and put water in the jars. And when they presented the jars to the master, they started tasting the finest of wines. Those for whom that miracle would have had the greatest impact were the servants. They put water in the jar. They knew that Jesus turned that water into wine. If you were in the crowd, you could easily say, oh, hey, they put wine in the jars in the first place. Don't try to pull one over on me. The servants were impacted the most. I share with you, in my life, I have never seen an outpouring of God's multiplication efforts than what I've experienced in Central Plains in these years. And as we have lived into that, the majority are Hispanic, Spanish-speaking leaders, but not all. But as we have, again, lived into that, and I could share much more, the way that God has provided individuals, provided opportunities, one after the other. As we've lived into this, then God provided this. When we lived into this, he provided this. And over the last 2 years, the amazing thing for me is we have connections with leaders and churches in Argentina and Chile and Uruguay. And our experience there is that they are asking to join us. We're not out trying to plant churches. There are churches and leaders who are asking to join us. And so we've built relationships with them. And then, as Alita referred to a meeting this past January, I was asked to join with other RCA leaders. And what I discovered was what God seems to be doing here and through Central Plains classes is not an isolated event, but God is causing that to happen in many places throughout the RCA, extending the RCA into other continents, other countries. So then we began the question about, okay, how do we put all this together? And again, I repeat, you all are much smarter than I am. I am faithful to trying to do what I believe we're supposed to do in Central Plains and live in and live through that. So that's where we are. I think there still are questions about how all that goes together, but we are currently establishing part of our multiplication effort. Not only the whole credentialing process, but how do we continue to support and train leaders to build healthy and vital reproducing ministries, but establishing an international team that would continue to build relationships with these leaders wanting to become part of us, the Central Plains, and part of the Reformed Church. So it's an amazing journey for me. I am so grateful. And even as a result of where we are right now, I have been asked to serve now rather than just with Central Plains, but to serve as the regional executive of the Heartland Synod. That starts January 1st. And at the same time, Reverend Fabio Sosa, who an ordained minister of Word and Sacrament in the RCA, has been our classis Hispanic coordinator, but he will be joining me on the regional synod staff because there's a desire in all of our classes to become more multiplication focused and certainly recognize that this is a multicultural opportunity. Matter of fact, in my prayer time, what we've passed with all of our classes is that when we pray globularly. So we've provided a globe for all of the people in our classes because it's a whole different kind of experience and perspective for us. So it's an honor for me to share what my journey's been here. Thanks.
Alita, Liz, go ahead.
Alita, do you mind if I just ask this? This is a new realm for me, so I just have some terminology questions. The first one is just, you switched, Dale, from churches to ministries in your, I just wanted you to just talk about that switch.
Liz, excellent. That was a very intentional decision on our class's leadership because we recognize that the way that God seems to be moving, obviously, is very legitimately through ministries, not necessarily churches. It's a both and. And so in doing so, I believe that we helped to support, like, for instance, one of the ministries is in the 3rd Ward of Houston, which is the most difficult crime-ridden wards in Houston. And it's literally a sports ministry. There's no intent of having a worshiping community. But what Prince Kusnard is doing is building basketball and baseball teams. And then he and his wife and others who he's discipled over the last number of years are ministering to the families of those athletes. His son was a basketball star out of Wichita State. So sports is in their family. We have another ministry that started in Omaha, Nebraska, that began as a food ministry, but has become more of a diaper ministry. They just gave away their millionth diaper. We have another ministry that is a college ministry with Reverend Ted and Reverend Dr. Andrea Godwin Stremler in Texas, and they're doing a college ministry for for college students, training and discipling tomorrow's leaders today.
Mhm.
And then obviously the majority are actual worshiping bodies, but we were intentional to say, allow existing churches to be creative to develop community need meeting ministries that would extend God's kingdom in creative ways.
So that sounds really interesting and really new, I mean, not new, people have been doing
sure.
ministries forever, but, I'm wondering, I know how the RCA defines a church, and I love our polity, and our polity seems to have traction outside of the RCA, which I think sounds really life-giving to me, because especially as a woman in ministry, the RCA polity is what allows me to express my own call from God. So, so I just wondered if there's a definition, like how you define a ministry.
Yeah, for us, it was a community need meeting ministry, and they're not going to show up on any kind of RCA statistics.
No, and I mean for you, since you're developing something new, like how do you track this? And you have numbers, so I'm just wondering, like, and it doesn't have to be formal. Just throw a couple of things at me.
Exactly, and that is tearing the hair out of our clerk, because like even with the diaper ministry, how do you count that? You count the number of people who come through on a weekly basis. It's not worship. It is community contact. So we're looking at community contacts, and with those ministries, the numbers they don't match up to what we would normally do. We can with the worshiping ministries. How many community contacts have you made within a month, and how many people then are responding, and how many people are in discipleship groups, and how many leaders are you training? Because that's a challenge in itself. It's an exciting challenge. Is one of the things that these new churches and leaders are expressing to us is certainly the theology, for sure. Pretty exciting conversations about the Synod of Dort with these new leaders, probably more than I've had with RCA pastors in 40 years, and the Heidelberg Catechism. But our polity is pretty important. And for them, rather than being independent leaders, recognizing, the building of elders and deacons to form a consistory, and the offices working together to lead their congregation is refreshing to them. It's new and it's refreshing. They desire that. So a lot of training. I think I lost the question, but
No, I understand that it's a growing event that you're trying to support. So I'm just wondering, with the polity as something that's being affirmed in all this, I just have that question: how do we extend some of that, and not too much, into these other more informal places? That's all.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I'm serious. It will be interesting. But there's certainly a desire on their part, and a willingness on our part. And what a great opportunity of certainly extending the Reformed tradition, and what a great opportunity of adopting more into the RCA. And here's my experience also is, and one of the major emphasis that values we've had is that this is a mutual learning experience, and it's a mutual learning journey for us. This isn't Central Plains trying to teach these Hispanic ministries how to be Anglo Central Plains churches. it is a joy for us to experience a shared learning journey. Like we had our classes retreat this past July, and one of our Hispanic churches provided the worship. I saw old Dutch guys moving their hips in worship. I mean, it was kind of exciting. And when you combine the richness and the depth of our theology with a refreshed passion for Jesus and the gospel, it's just amazing to see that come together. And that's what we're learning. And kind of another example I saw is one of the things that we wanted to establish are benchmarks for growth in these new ministries, so that we knew that they were on target and growing, et cetera, et cetera. So establishing benchmark. So I think we established 4 or 5 different areas, worship and finance and community outreach complex, et cetera, that we had established. So we had an equal number of Hispanics then at the table trying to discuss this. And one of our new Hispanic leaders looked at this and said, well, where is the training of our next church planter? It's like, oh, yeah, we don't think in terms of establishing that kind of DNA for multiplication. And so it is pretty cool to have kind of a mutual learning in the journey.
So Dale, can I just ask to clarify of the, praise God that what you envisioned was overflowing.
Yep.
That God responded with overflowing response. Of these new additions to Central Plains, there were 11 churches in Washington, D.C. Are they in that number, or are they still waiting to be somehow brought into the classes?
They are.
I understand that the number has grown to 40 now. It's not just 11, that it's, 40 Argentinian churches, but those 11 in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, yes. They're still in waiting. None of them have officially made any kind of progress, but the relationship is still there. And actually, Alita, my wife and I, along with Eddie and Fabio Sosa, attended a gathering in Washington, D.C. of 35 churches that had expressed interest. And it was through an organization called NAHPA, N-A-H-P-A, North American Hispanic Pastors Association or something like that. It's an independent group that supports independent. And so they're the ones who have expressed interest. But no, we have not developed any. We've got, I think, 7 more right now that are in process of developing NCPs. And I got word yesterday there's 2 additional ones. So it's amazing to me how much time we have to spend on all of these new churches, and just the quality of credentialing them. That's huge. And again, supporting them. But last I heard is that there could be as many as 200 churches in the Argentinian, Chilean, Uruguay area that are expressing interest. So again, helping them to form a network and then welcoming them to our classes. And what does that mean? I don't know.
Liz, aren't you from the classes of New Brunswick?
No, I started there, but now I'm in classes Delaware Raritan.
Oh, Delaware Raritan. So I believe Washington, D.C. is in the bounds of classes in New Brunswick. Is that correct? You had a Maryland.
James actually is an expert on that.
Okay. Just trying to clarify.
Yeah, sort of, because of the Maryland church being part of New Brunswick, but that's one of those things that's, as I understand it, even now being sorted out exactly how those churches are relating and fitting. I'd like us to move on, let Chad have a chance to talk, and then we'll give Liz and Alita a chance to ask questions and then respond and move on to everybody.
Thank you, James. Forgive my voice. So first, a little bit about me. Making a mission up front. I'm not Dutch. My history is French-Canadian with French Huguenot history. I was born in Detroit, which is properly pronounced Detroit. My family moved to central Michigan in 1976, where my parents were teachers at a Christian college. My mother was a sociology professor. My father taught theology and Bible. He also recruited international students to come and attend the college. And while we were there, my family helped plant a church, mostly with the international students. And it was a Reformed church. And that's really the environment I grew up in, Reformed, missional, and global. I think that early formation uniquely prepared me for this new reality that we see. Now, I want to address, first of all, as the director of church multiplication for the Reformed Church in America, I believe Liz asked a question earlier. Yeah, my office does not plant churches. We do not do that. Classes plant churches in the RCA. Churches plant churches. It is my role, my office role, to support classes. In no way is my office seeking to go and plant churches anywhere, internationally or locally. We are simply here to be a resource and a support for classes in the good work that they do to strengthen and plant RCA congregations. Now, as Alita alluded to, the RCA has a history of starting new congregations, even going all the way back to the Synod of Dort, with the youngest delegate at the Synod, Gisbertus Vestus, who wrote during Dort. He defined Reformed mission as preaching the gospel, planting new congregations, and showing grace. So, as I like to say, every RCA congregation was at one point planted. We would not be here had it not been for planting congregations in the New World. Now, with all that said, I can speak to what one particular classes has been doing because I was directly involved. I was the executive leader for Classes de las Naciones from the very beginning. About a decade ago, we saw a tremendous amount of failure in the Florida region in the RCA. Over 10 years ago, there were 24 congregations in Florida alone. When my wife and I moved to Florida 4 years ago, there were 4. Most all of these congregations were planted by Midwestern white people coming to Florida to plant around snowbirds. And so we asked the question, why don't we have churches in Florida planted by Florida people for Florida people? That really was the first question. Now, another thing that really drives me as someone who loves missiology is the global shift that Luis referred to. We understand that every 500 years, there seems to be some kind of reformation and cycle in the church. And my professor of old, George Hunsberger, would argue in the 1960s, the center of the global Christian church began to shift from North America to what we refer to as the majority world or the global South. And we've seen evidence in the last 2 decades of movement in the Protestant church. In South America, the Protestant church has grown by 1,200%, outpacing the Catholic Church for the first time in history. Africa has similar numbers, around 1,200% growth. Asia is double at about 3,200% growth. If we listen to missiologies like Dr. Sam George, who is out of India, he says that our whole concept of mission really does need to change as the church shifts. We need to move from what he would say a mission to perspective, where we carry the gospel to the rest of the world. to a simultaneous mission understanding that the gospel has been reached to every continent today. And we are living in a time where the gospel is coming from and to simultaneously from everywhere to everywhere. And this really was part of the DNA and the thinking behind Clases de las Naciones. We wanted to build a bridge from the global south to North America and see what God was doing. So we began to build relationships many years ago with Reformed pastors that had come from the global south to Florida to plant new congregations. They were looking for opportunities to grow and connect, and they were very Reformed. They had no connection to any denomination or group here in North America. And one of the things that we benefit from is the high percentage of female pastoras. Because of our egalitarian position in our polity, we gain many excellent Reformed pastors and pastoras, unlike anything I'd ever seen. One example I would like to point out is an RCA pastor named Sebastian Jimenez, who is originally from Argentina. Sebastian was a pastor at an RCA congregation in Arizona for years before moving to Miami to help start Montreal Church. To date, Sebastian has taught over 800 new believers the Heidelberg Catechism in Spanish. These are Reformed pastors. These are Reformed churches. And I want to make clear, one of the things that has been suggested to me, we just take anybody. In fact, we did the numbers. Clases de las Naciones reject 73% of those who apply to join us. It's not because we enjoy rejecting people, it's because we have the same standards of any RCA before us. We hold to the same mandates, the same competencies, everything as before for our congregations here. But the challenge that was presented to us was most of our pastors coming from the majority world have other churches back in the majority world who are tied to the congregations here in Florida. So we didn't know what to do. We went to many polity leaders in the RCA to try to figure this out. And we're still trying to figure that out. But looking at Sebastian alone, he has congregations back in Argentina, Mexico, and other countries that are tied to Montreal Church. They desire to stay a church, but they are now part of the RCA. What do we do with that? So we met for 2 years trying to figure out a way to welcome these congregations who are seeking to be part of this network. So we're doing our best to try to figure this out because this is not the normal thing, but we're being responsive to what we believe God is doing as a new thing. One thing that Clases de las Naciones likes to say is God started the RCA 400 years ago as an immigrant denomination and appears to be making the RCA an immigrant denomination again.
Chad, how could other classes get involved in becoming an immigrant classes? Because we all have opportunities. I do believe that there's no place in the RCA context that we don't have opportunities to reach out to immigrants. So how do we do that?
Yeah. One clarification, I wouldn't call any classes an immigrant classes. I'd call them a Reformed church classes, but I think that's happening. We are more than willing to dialogue about what God is doing in Clases de las Naciones, if we can assist any classes. I can say from my seat in the RCA, it's been amazing the amount of immigrant-based congregations in the Northeast that are coming into classes up there. So almost all of the new congregations that have approached us through my office have been female-led global pastors who are coming in places like New Hampshire, New York, New Jersey, So I don't think it's going to be hard. It's just a matter of saying yes and figuring it out together. We don't have all the answers, but we can sure work together on it.
Is your dissertation going to be on Clases de las Naciones by any chance?
Yeah, that's part of it. It's on this 500-year cycle that we're emerging into now, and what God is doing globally through the RCA. Yeah.
Great to hear. Great to hear. Liz?
So can you talk just a little bit about how the process of, discernment with a church? Just a real rough outline.
Yeah. Discerning the process with any pastor or congregation that wants to join.
Yeah. Especially since you said that there's a 73% rejection. Yeah.
Yep. So we follow the policy, the process from the RCA, which is a church and the pastor are two different simultaneously processes. Typically what tends to happen is I would have a one-on-one meeting with the pastors, and try to discern a fit relationally, theologically, polity-wise. I then recommend it to the multiplication leader and to the leadership development ordination leader. And then the three of us meet with the candidates. We then meet with, if there is a congregation that exists in what we would call an adoption process, we would meet with them as well, gauge their interest in Reformed polity, their understanding, and we kind of gauge readiness and fit. If we sense that what a pastor or congregation is looking for is money, that's an automatic rejection. If what we find is a desire to be reformed and belong into a community of Reformed churches, that's what we look for. And so we just try to discern relationally, and we try to see how it matches up with who we are.
So I guess I'm wondering in particular, like I got converted because of the power of the consistory, so that it's not, I came from a Roman Catholic background, and the Catholic University in America is owned by the Pope, and I got converted by that Lutheran idea of the priesthood of all believers and the parity of office. Is that something that's a stumbling block? I mean, there are hierarchical churches that want the authority of the pastor, and I feel like the RCA is the opposite. I just wondered if that's a cultural issue for people.
Not at all. In our experience, we see a great sigh of relief when they understand our consistory model, because most come from a hierarchical position. I remember a couple of years ago, my dear departed brother Wayne Van Rigemorter and I were teaching BCO training in consistories to a congregation rooted in Venezuela. When they got it, literally the pastor began crying out of relief and said, "Thank God I don't have all the responsibility." So our experience has been very much the opposite.
Thank you. So Lita, do you have a response for us?
I have a response. It's my own personal experience. At the gathering in Orlando at the beginning of the year, Dr. Van Engen had some questions, and his second question was, what is reverse missions? Because at the time we were considering the question of, is this reverse missions coming from the South to help revitalize or regrow the northern churches as we continue to see them diminish. And Dr. Van Engen pointed out that in the 1980s and 90s, there was reverse mission, and that at the time it was defined as people coming from the southern churches to the north. It would be somebody from our historic mission partner who would come in and teach and train North American leaders and churches. And that stopped because there was a real disadvantage. It was an unintended consequence, but the disadvantage for the Southern Church is they were sending their best and brightest and most credentialed people to the North, and it was leaving the Southern Church, at least within our historical partners, somewhat handicapped. And so there was an attempt on the part of East Sioux classes to send a mission to Venezuela, which was suggested by the Hispanic Council. And the idea was to train church planters, but not in a way that you think of, we go in and we teach the Heidelberg Catechism. The idea was to go in and listen and learn. And, Luis mentioned the humility of the RCA, particularly the global missions. Our missionaries have been very humble. And so Doug and I were called and commissioned by East Sioux classes to go to Caracas, to go to a non-historic partner and participate in the training, a lot of which was financially helping them, because with both of us being professors at the training school, that saved them a lot of money, in addition to the projects that the RCA would support financially. And so, we thought, oh, hey, this is the answer to the brain drain. And in fact, most of the time that we were there, we're constantly encouraging our students, please don't leave Venezuela. Venezuela needs you. Do not leave Venezuela. And we were dead wrong, because in the end, there was a huge diaspora that happened, no fault of the church, and our students, 400 students, scattered all over the world. And we went, oh, yeah, God always works that way. He's always working through dispersed people. And so what kind of mission we were on, we never had a name for it. Some people said, oh, your phase out mission. Other people said, oh, well, now that you're back in the United States, your return mission. The classes of East Sioux never decommissioned me, and Global Mission said, come back. We're going to create a new kind of mission. And that never got defined. And I feel like I just keep listening and learning. And to me, today, the beauty of today's panel was, I just feel like I continue to learn, what kind of mission is that we're creating? And this was a huge answer to a lot of my questions about that. So thank you to all the panelists for your wisdom and your gracious responses today. Liz?
So yeah, this was complete new learning for me. I'm a new pastor, 4 years in ministry, a long time elder though. And so the whole idea that started from Luis, that this is a movement that comes from the bottom up, comes from the discernment at the local level, where in my theology, which is really close to which is in some ways the RCA polity, that our Lord Jesus Christ is closest, where we're celebrating the sacrament of communion together. That's where we can really feel his holy presence. So from that perspective, I love that Luis's organization is not a planting organization, but a coming alongside. That feels really life-giving. I have to say, I was converted by 200 undocumented Indonesians in my local central New Jersey church who needed help and who started calling me pastor when I started waking up and responding. So I see my life is all about how God works through strangers and people who aren't part of our original communion, meeting us and guiding us and teaching us. So all those things, I really resonate with everything I heard here. My concern is, so I'm here as the moderator of Commission on Theology, and I got this really annoying message from somebody on CORE. And it was, so moderator, we're calling all the moderators and we want to know how you're going to respond to the RCA's anti-racism policy. So I hear very positive possibilities. But I have to say, a big concern that I have is that I keep hearing Heidelberg, 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 and I haven't heard the Belhar once mentioned in my very cursory look, and I haven't heard it today, and I haven't heard anti-racism, and I'd like to even package that a little bit, because when I was researching MBTS and their anti-racism policy and classes, I saw that they were advised by their global students to enlarge the focus of that class to a class in power and privilege. So I think our global partners have a lot to teach us about power and privilege in their places of origin. And my big question is, how do these pieces kind of mesh together?
And I'm going to let that question be out there and be part of the conversation, because we've been having a great conversation among ourselves, but we've got folks out who've been watching and whose hands are going up. And so I'm going to start to call on them. Young Na, can you go ahead and ask your question?
Actually, I was listening, very curious about international churches. Since I'm teaching and preach, I will be teaching actually Hebrew language in Pakistan. I was figuring a way to connect the possibility to support building a Pakistan church through in RCA. So that's why I was jumping in. Since I'm teaching the seminarian actually via Zoom, and possibility meeting a pastor, future pastor to be. So I was just watching, asking how can we connect to support to be a church planter in Pakistan. So that's why I was jumping in. Yeah,
Okay.
but hearing and then, I don't know how to do it, but I don't know how to do it, but just listening. Maybe God give us the wisdom to planting, not just, Hispanic, also in Pakistan, who are, devoting their life, to be they are sacrifice their life, to be a Christian. Being a Christian, they are experiencing persecution. So I'm more like I'm willing to support honestly those risking their life to be a Christian. So I like teaching right policy, right doctrine. So that's why I was, join the find a way. How can I support building a church planting in Pakistan? That's why. Yeah. And thank you for your sharing with us. Thank you. Not particular occasion because I'm, raising my occasion high.
Mhm. Okay.
You want me to respond to that, James?
Anybody who wants to can respond to that. Yes, go.
Hello, Sister Young. We talked about this the other day too. Again, our office doesn't go out and make these kind of connections to Pakistan, but if your classes has relationships with churches in Pakistan, I would implore you to bring your classes into this conversation and see what kind of work might develop between the classes. That's the only way we know is through relationship. So we're not flying to Pakistan to try to find churches to make RCA or anything. That's not what we do. But if there is a relationship with you, I would just ask you to go to your classes and work together. It's good to hear your voice, yo.
Yeah, thank you. I figured it out actually, but make sure of how to do it because I'm beginning to teach from January, so I find a way to connect to build a church there since I'm serving them freely. So yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Marco Avila, would you go ahead and unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. My question is, what are the biggest challenges adopting churches or networks from outside North America? Because I think from inside, church polity pretty much can be applied to them, but how do we consider the context when organizations are in Mexico or, anywhere in Latin America, for example? That's my question.
Yeah, Luis can speak to this as well. I think one of the biggest challenges is like we look into other Reformed denominations who have international congregations to see examples of how they process this. And what Luis and I discovered was nobody actually empowers local leadership in contextualization for polity and expression. So we didn't have one model that didn't feel a little colonialistic to follow. So as we established the Reformed Church of Colombia, we are not forcing the RCA strict Americanized polity on these congregations, but we're walking alongside saying, how can we serve you? How can we make this relevant for your context? So we're not forcing the RCA on anybody. I would say that's the biggest, is the contextualization of RCA into other contexts. Luis, you want to follow that up?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the challenges are that it is a different context, and the North American Church, our classes are in a large learning curve. That's a big part, I think, of what we're facing. We are leaning heavily on our Latino, Hispanic pastors and leaders who have these networks in those countries, and we're really asking them to help lead a lot of this, and primarily to help teach us, the North American Church, the classes, how to maneuver and develop those relationships and build trusting relationship. That's key. We know this through our global mission partnership that these trusting relationships are the most important bedrock of establishing good partnership, good relationships. And so that's the learning curve. But I think also, Lita and Liz, you mentioned about the diversity and the issues of racism and those things. Where do they lie in this kind of package? I think it's when we're at a posture of learning. It's a humble place to be when the North American church is sitting and not talking, sitting and only listening, sitting and watching other leaders take leadership roles. And so I think that's where we begin to see a more equitable system working itself out within race and within gender and within hierarchical leadership as well. It's a interesting journey, challenging journey, but we feel that the Holy Spirit has empowered us at this time for this specific movement. And so we're grateful for that.
And Marco, I would say that one of the big barriers has been around credentialing. We have church planners in the United States who have planted 5, 6, 7 churches in their home country, and they come to the United States and we say, "Oh, what are your credentials?" And it's so hurtful, so incredibly hurtful. The RCA has worked towards accepting what we call commissioned pastors. It's a different route to pastoral leadership, and I think that we're learning to be more accepting of the opportunities coming our way. But as you may have noticed, Chad mentioned credentialing as an issue for every classes.
Yeah, thank you. Has been very helpful, your insights.
Romella Robinson. Why don't you go ahead and if you can unmute and ask your question, that would be great.
Hello.
Hello.
Actually, I'm with my wife, Romila Robinson. I'm Pastor Sheraz Sharif Alam. I'm a General Secretary of Presbyterian Church of Pakistan.
Oh.
And it's good to hear that how God is working to his people around the world. And as our sister before asked a question about Pakistan, and here I just want to know that how RCA can be part of Pakistan mission, because here we are second largest denomination right now, but also the church at large is a persecuted church where life and ministry is difficult. Most of you about theology and what kind of theology is needed to enhance the faith of those who are marginalized. And in Pakistan is a double marginalization. People are already marginalized and the church is marginalized itself. So it's kind of mission where marginalized serving marginalized. And how RCA they can be a partner of working in Pakistan to extend the mission of God in a global mission also. Thank you.
Thank you for your question and for your presence of being here with us. We really are grateful. As a representative of Global Mission, this is our role. Our role is to partner with ministry agencies, mission agencies across the world. We've done that historically with many partnerships, and we would love to get to know you. And so I would say a good first step is to get in touch with us at Global Mission, RCA Global Mission. You can just look that right up and get our information. We do have a supervisor who does lead mission regionally in India, Pakistan, and the Middle East. and that person would love to just hear what's going on in your region, and to see if there are ways that we can partner. And so again, as we talk about the adopting and starting of churches, we do see our church multiplication and global mission agencies working together in supporting the work of mission and the work of classes around church planting and church adopting. And so we do have definite lines. Global Mission will never stop doing what we do. We will continue to be an agency that's serving the global church to strengthen and grow them. But we're also including this new model of adopting and starting Reformed churches. So we'd love to talk to you, and I hope you can get a hold of us so we can start that dialogue.
And while Luis was speaking, our intrepid director of communications here at New Brunswick put the link for RCA Global Missions up in the chat. So you can find it right there and get through to there and find the person you need and make your contacts. And I welcome you doing that. Jim Reed, go ahead.
Hello, how are you doing? I've got two questions, and they're in the area of, one, resourcing. And when I say resourcing, I mean good old money, and I also mean skills, competence, people. All of what you were talking about is going to take resources, and resources of all of those kinds. You have spoken at length about the resources of people and of their expertise, and that has been very gratifying to hear. Traditionally, and when I say traditionally, I don't say that with a seal of approval. The flow of resources has been from north to south in terms of global resourcing and resourcing of missions. When you say majority world, meaning basically that world south of the equator, we're still in a position where the majority of resources by far rests north of the equator and needs to move south of the equator. That's not 100% flow, but it is an obvious flow. I'm not hearing a lot about what the practicalities are of how to resource this type of church planting. I know that classes do not necessarily have a lot of spare resources. In fact, decline of classical life in the RCA has greatly affected the available resources that we have to spend elsewhere in terms of evangelistic work. Many of our churches who have been around for 100 years don't know whether they're going to be around for another 2. So there you have a wallet that has gotten very slim. If the expectation is, and I was interested to see that one of the immediate disqualifications for people seeking to enter into the Naciones classes is if they're looking for money. Well, that would hold true for almost any classes because we don't have it. And that whole area needs some very deep practical thinking. Where are we going to get resources that we need to follow up on the leads that we are being given, the gifts that we have been given? How do we develop that financially? How do we develop that in terms of developing skilled people or importing skilled people? What skills need to be traded back and forth? which is probably the more accurate way of putting it. That's the first area. Second area is structure. You're talking about this being a classes-based initiative. Glad to hear it. As the classes executive for Greater Palisades for a number of years before my retirement, I know that classes have some advantages in the RCA polity. One is they have bounds. Those bounds have been geographically expressed for most of our denominational history. They've been challenged. And much of what you are doing and the work that you have been describing challenges the notion of geographical bounds. But geographical bounds do some things for you. First, they provide direct human experience of the conditions under which ministry occurs. You know, I know what it's like to try to do ministry in Bergen and Passaic and Hudson County, New Jersey. And I know that that's not going to be the same when I get out to Holland, Michigan. Been there, seen that. It also provides a kind of, bounds provide a cultural cohesion point. And that cultural cohesion is what we have stumbled over for 100 years, 200 years. That, you know, we keep talking to ourselves as, well, we're Dutch. Well, we haven't been Dutch for a long time. Let's face it.
Wow.
Right? Language. Classes Palisades, Greater Palisades, operated in 3 languages: English, Spanish, Korean. And there were a couple more tossed in there, right, Alita? Yeah, okay. That made communication of just the operation of the classes extremely complicated. I mean, there were times when we had 3 languages going and none of us were talking sense to one another. And you had to slow the process down. You had to repeat again and again. Eventually, God lifted the fog. And we could do things together that were really good. But
Jim, I'm going to ask you to kind of make your question a little more circumspect, only because of issues of time, and there are other folks in the queue. I'm also going to point out that, you know, I've been in classes that only spoke in one language, and we were all speaking nonsense to each other. So
yes, I'm just saying that this, however, is a complication that if you are bringing people purposefully into the classes, this is a complication you're going to have to deal with every day. You're just going to have to deal with that. And I'm not hearing how that structure, how that's going to be able within the structure that we have.
So let's see if anybody wants to take a shot at, Chad wants to take a shot at answering.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. As far as resourcing goes, yeah, our current structure is very North America centric. We are not designed or set up to fund global congregations. I would welcome a charge for fundraising for millions of dollars in order to support churches around the world. But we are not set up for that. And most classes can't afford it, let alone a baby classes like Classes de las Naciones. However, Classes de las Naciones is committed to supporting our churches and pastors regardless of address. We talk about structure. Again, we're doing our best. I absolutely agree with you that geographical bounds are important, which is why we are building classes locally that are part of a network focused on mission. So everywhere we go, we're creating local leadership with classes for local support, local governance. We are not at all creating a mega classes that is international. That's the simplest way I can explain it. There's much more. And again, just because I don't mention the Belhar doesn't mean we don't teach the Belhar. Just because I don't mention, there's just not time to say everything. Luis,
And I
do
would
you
just, I just add, I think that there is a mechanism in which we are able to raise money and send money abroad, and that's through Global Mission. And so I think we are having this conversation, and this is being spread and shared across our denomination to be able to develop these type of opportunities as part of our DNA, and discover how, and as you asked, how do we equip the church to send its resources to these wonderful new partnerships around the world? And I think we do have a great asset, and that is Global Mission, to be able to lean on their expertise, lean on the abilities to give in a global way, international way, and to raise the funds that's needed within our bounds. And so I'm excited. I think these are opportunities and not necessarily just challenges that we would like to explore even more. So I really appreciate your questions and concerns. And I think we do have, as we see the lanes of Global Mission and church multiplication working together with our classes, I think we have a good pathway of trying to figure this out.
I want to acknowledge, Dale, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd put my 2 cents in, no pun intended. But as far as the finances, I think I am learning in thinking about church planting, church adoptions. I am learning to think differently than the way I've been trained or what my experience out of the past has been. My past tells me when we begin churches, we have to fund them. The 1980s church growth kind of direction was that you needed to fund them in order to have staff. And based on that, you're going to build an attraction model to bring people into your church. What I'm learning is that many of these most 85 to 87% of our churches are led by bivocational leaders. They have other streams of revenue for their family and for their ministry. And so they're not dependent on that large sum of money like the 1980 church growth emphasis would say. And actually the teaching, all of our leaders go through an 80-hour training. And in that training, they are taught that they are to tithe. So our clerk continues to receive checks from some of our small new ministries. She got a check for $15. She got a check for $27. So that as they're coming into the RCA, they are taught that they are to tithe rather than coming with an open hand. They are to open their hand to us. So.
Okay. Jill Fensky. Go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. I have an observation and a question. First of all, I have for many years, I'm pastor at the church that I am at for 31 years, small membership church, Northeastern New Jersey. What unnerves me is our continuing conversation, not only in this conversation, but across the denomination, is that numbers and money matter. I have a congregation currently that engages 70 to 80% of our members. We are small, but in Bible study or adult Christian education every week. And what I hear from denominationally is that's not significant. So I think for me, equating growth and success are not helpful. The question that I have, or the observation that I have, is I've heard a lot of different terminology being used. I've heard planting churches, partnering with churches, and adopting. I think those are all very different pieces of language. They say different things to me, and it would be helpful to me. This whole conversation has been helpful, but it would be helpful for me to understand either your differentiation between those, or how do we come up with a term that can cover what it is you are actually doing. And I'll take my answer off the air.
Yeah, thank you, Jill. I would agree that there's been an unhealthy focus with numbers. I'm doing my very best to get away from church growth theory as a whole because I think it's unhelpful. We know now today that the majority of the RCA exists with 45 congregants or less. That's the average median. If you go by church growth theory, most of those should be closed because they're not effective or healthy churches, which is just dumb. Size does not matter. What matters is our effectiveness in ministry and creating wholeness in congregants that look more like Jesus. I don't think any of this movement that we've talking about, as people are coming into the RCA, we're not celebrating growth, we're celebrating health. And I don't think any of us have indicated size matters in any of the language we've used today. So I just want to speak to that I concur with your thinking and that I think it's done a lot of harm. And we need to be moving away from that kind of thinking. Luis, you want to?
No, you answered it perfectly. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I thought you were indicating a follow-up.
Okay. Micah McCreary.
Good afternoon, and I thank you all for being here. Great to see you all, and great to see you all, period. One question and three reasons for the question. The question is, what effect do you think the browning of the RCA will have on the RCA? And I ask that for three reasons. One, the marginalization of NBTS as it became browner. Two, the intersectionality that has to happen around socio-race, gender, and class. And three, the fact that we are reformed, but as we brown, we have to also become ecumenical. Thank you.
Luis, I don't think it would be appropriate for me to speak first.
Yeah, as the brown panelist, I will go first. No,
Nice dodge, Chad.
Yeah. Dr. McCreary, thank you for your question. So thankful for you and your ministry and your service to the RCA. I think this is one of the great challenges that we face in the RCA. As a country, we can see this in all sectors of life and society, that this is a definite challenge whenever we look at diversity or at an equitable life or living as people. It becomes the challenge that we all face. I served for 7.5 years with that particular ministry in working with a primarily white Caucasian dominant culture church that was trying to become multicultural. And the challenges of that taught me so much of just the need to be patient and the need to be bold. I think those were the two places where I felt were the lessons of my life. I think we take this as an organization. I think we would have to be very honest to ourselves to know that there will be pushback, particularly around more and more people of color becoming part of our denomination and in leadership and in spaces where probably traditionally we didn't see a diversity. we need to be honest that that this will be a challenge for our denomination. Although I think it might be a challenge, the boldness that I think we should take is that we also consider where we are. We are in a fight for our life as we consider our downsizing and the decay and the decline of the Christian church here in America. And the RCA is not is a denomination that faces this. And so the bold part of this vision is that we would engage in this serious conversation and challenge, and we would sit humbly as a denomination and learn from our differences, grow from our areas of maybe misunderstandings, and challenge our own our inner fighting within ourselves of how we look at one another. I think that's the bold place we need to be at as we look and consider this movement. And this is a great opportunity for us to engage it. But I totally agree. This is the challenge of the church in a movement like this.
James, if I may share an insight here, very practically, because Central Plains, obviously, with 30 additional ministries, many of whom are brown, it is causing us to rethink what's the purpose of classes in the first place. And we're discovering that each of us has become comfortable in our own understanding of classes. And so as we begin a new year, it was always, how do we do that a little better? But we're looking at our understanding of classes. And so it's causing a refreshed consideration of what are we really to be about? And it's causing us to look inwardly and recognize our own biases, and to be open to say, okay, how do we do what the purpose of classes is, and be creative and open in what that is. So for me, one of the major results here is wide openness to change, and getting back to who are we supposed to be and what is the purpose underneath all of this, and let's build from there.
Okay.
Brother Micah, I would, as always, is an honor to talk. I think that I can notice the only thing people tend to fear more than public speaking is change. And your phraseology, I would just say, I don't think the RCA is going to brown. It has. In my observation, the analogy I tend to use for people, when I think about the RCA as it is, I see two white guys at a restaurant fighting over scraps on a table that's closed down 50 years ago. And the reality is the restaurant moved down the street years ago, and we're just not realizing it is the reality. But I don't know if you know, white people don't like to give up power. Seems to be an issue through the years for white people. And that's just going to have to change, because it's just not the reality. The sooner we embrace the reality that we are a global church, the better. And the quicker we have a posture of receiving mission rather than the propagators of one, the better everybody's going to be. So the token white guy, that's my perspective.
And I would add, I agree with that. I would add to its power with, not power over. And we've got to see that shift, you know. Yeah.
Our friend from Pakistan has had his hand raised. He has one more question, I guess. So I'm going to invite him to talk again. Go ahead.
Hello, this is Romila.
Hello.
I'm the second ordained woman minister in Pakistan, and this is my second time to attend the webinar of the RCA. And I really appreciate the way they are working and the way they conversate different things. And as I was listening to the whole conversation, first of all, I'm really grateful to the speakers and to the two ladies who has put up the questions to explore the more understanding of what they were speaking about. My question is, because I belong to the Southeast Asia part of the world, and most of the times what I have observed that whenever there are some meetings or anything going on, there is an uneven number of the male and female, right? The people, the woman and the men. I just wanted to ask if RCA is planning to have any programs or projects specifically working on the woman participation in the church or the ministry, or anything that they can work on for the rights of the women, particularly in Southeast Asian countries. That may include Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, because I have met a lot of Asian women who are facing this issue that they are not being given equal rights, not even in the church, not even in the community or in the society. So is RCA having any future plans for that, or still working on it, or they have anything right now? Thank you so much.
I can answer a little bit of that, I think, sort of. And first, I'm not sure how much influence the RCA can have on churches in Southeast Asian countries about this, but we do what we can. You will want to, if you want to find out more about what the RCA is doing with this, you want to be in touch with Women's Transformation and Leadership. And I will try in a minute to put up the email address for Liz Testa, who is the person who runs Women's Transformation and Leadership for the RCA. And you may want to come back on March 18th, which is a Saturday. In the afternoon, we will be having our annual Women's Stories Day at the Reformed Church Center. It will be online, and it will be celebrating the 50th anniversary of the ordination of women as deacons and elders in the RCA. So that might be a time when you'd like to be around for that.
Thank you so much.
James, I would just want to encourage you and Ramala to talk, and we would love to hear your story.
Yes. And so, yeah, you're certainly welcome to share more with me, and I can see where I can help you out with those things. For me, it's very simple, jbrum@nbts.edu, and you will find me. Thank you for everybody who's been here. I know that there are going to be other questions. This conversation will continue. And last but certainly not least, I invite everybody back on January 18th. After Christmas has come and gone, we will have our next Reformed Church Center program. It will be the next part of our Dismantling Racism series as we talk about relationships with Native Americans in the RCA and beyond, and how land acknowledgement is just the beginning of that. But thank you everyone for being here and for a great conversation.